Hi, this is Omar at Top 5 E-Bikes, and today I'm going to compare the Radwagon 4, the Lectric XPedition, and the Aventon Abound, and you can find out which cargo bike is best for you. At the time I'm filming this video, it's November, it's almost Black Friday. If you're looking for a bike during this Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday, be sure to check out our website. And we have an article where we're compiling and adding all the Black Friday deals, so check that out at top5ebikes.com. If you haven't subscribed to Top 5 E-Bikes, please do so right now. If you like this type of content, also like this video because that'll help us with the algorithm. And if we help you decide on one of these e-bikes, please consider using one of the links in the description of this video, as we do get a small commission and that helps us continue making videos like this one. So thank you. All right, so let's get into this comparison. So in this comparison, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the different features and my experiences riding all three of these bikes, because I've ridden all three of these bikes quite a bit. And you can check out the description. We have the full reviews on each of these. Over the last year and a half, I've ridden all three of these for an extensive amount of time. So I think I have pretty good experience about these, and I'm going to speak about my experience in riding these. We'll go over a few general areas and we'll talk about how different these e-bikes are. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the price. And again, we have Black Friday approaching us. All three of these bikes are actually on sale during Black Friday. The Radwagon right now, if you went on the Rad Power bike site, is $17.99, so it's $200 off. The Abound, which is right here in front of me, is on sale for $15.99. And the Lectric XPedition is $13.99 for the single battery version, and it's $15.99 for the dual battery version. So these two are $15.99 if you end up getting the dual battery version of the Lectric XPedition, and the Radwagon is $17.99. So price-wise, not too much of a difference if you were just purely looking at it from a price perspective, but they have very different features, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a sec. Okay, so we talked about price. Let me get into the main components. And now this isn't going over every single component. I'm just going to focus on a few of the components. So I'm going to start off with the motor. So all three of these bikes have 750 watt motors. So at least that's what the companies tell us. Except for Lectric, none of the companies will actually tell you how many newton meters of torque. The Lectric XPedition is at 85 newton meters of torque. After riding these two, the Abound is somewhere, it's close to the Lectric XPedition. I'm not sure. I didn't see anyone reporting how many newton meters of torque. The Radwagon probably has the least amount of torque out of these three bikes. So now let's talk about the batteries. The batteries, at least when it comes to the Lectric and the single battery version, these are all 48 volt. The Lectric and the Radwagon have 14 amp hours, and the Abound has 15 amp hours. So pretty similar, 48 volt, 14 amp hours, 15 amp hours, a little bit bigger with the Aventon. I will say the one difference in the batteries is that Aventon has LG cells and they're UL compliant. Radwagon is working their way to being UL compliant. So the only one that doesn't really talk about any certifications or cells is the Lectric XPedition. So I know that that's kind of a hot topic these days. I would say that if you're really concerned about battery safety, Aventon is probably the top one out of these three when it comes to the battery safety, because they tell you the type of cells and it's UL compliant. So now let's talk about the sensors. The XPedition, the Radwagon, both of these have cadence sensors. That seems to be the norm with most e-bike companies, and when you talk about affordable e-bikes. Aventon is a little bit different because all their bikes now have a torque sensor. So the Abound has a torque sensor. That makes the Abound very different from these other two, because the feel of this one when you're cycling is a little bit different. So it doesn't feel as jumpy, it doesn't feel unnatural. So the torque sensor gives you more of a natural cycling feel relative to a cadence sensor. But I think for a lot of people that could be one of the reasons why you end up going with the Abound or some of these other bikes, depending on your situation. Next component are the brakes. So the Abound, the XPedition both have hydraulic brakes, and I think with the cargo bike you should have hydraulic brakes, because a lot of times you're carrying a lot of cargo. These are heavy bikes. The Radwagon has mechanical. So this is one of the few cargo e-bikes, affordable cargo e-bikes, that still doesn't have hydraulic brakes. As far as these two bikes, the ones that do have hydraulic brakes, I would say that the stopping power on the Tektros for the Abound are much better than the Zoom brakes on the Lectric. I mean, they're good stopping power on both, but I would say that the Abound has better brakes. But out of these three, I would say that the Abound has the most stopping power and the better stopping power. So we talked about the components. I went through all the main components. Now let me talk about the frame, the design, payload, and whatnot. So obviously, two of these bikes look like these are low frame bikes, so the Lectric and the Abound. And then you have the Radwagon, which is just a beefier bike. It's just a bigger frame. It's also longer. So you got a longer frame, longer rear rack on the Radwagon than you do the Lectric and the Abound. And I will say that if you are planning to carry two kids on your rear rack, with these shorter rear racks like the Abound and the Lectric, and this happened to me on both of these bikes, your child that's sitting in the middle, you will actually you'll likely clip your heels with the feet of your children. So because it's a smaller rear frame, it's just a little bit shorter than the Radwagon. I never had that issue with the Radwagon. So that's kind of one of the benefits to the Radwagon. It is a beefier frame, I think, and it's bigger. Now the negative to having this bigger frame and beefier frame is that it's a little bit harder to mount and dismount. So the step over height, the lowest point on the Radwagon is a lot higher than on the Aventon and the Lectric. So these two bikes are easier to mount and dismount. The approachability of it is something that I think it's important to point out. Also, when it comes to the frames, the Abound and the Lectric, these have foldable stems and they have foldable handlebars, which are great when it comes to storage. But one of the negatives, I think, with both of these bikes relative to the Radwagon is that if you're carrying a lot of weight, the stem can wiggle. So you kind of feel the handlebars on both of these bikes. You feel some movement, and that has to do, I think, with this foldable stem. And that's not something that I felt when I was riding with a large amount of weight on the Radwagon. So, just something to consider. It wasn't, for me overall, it wasn't something that was a deal breaker with both of these bikes. But if you're going to be carrying a lot of weight on a consistent basis, it's just something to consider. When it comes to payload, these two smaller frame bikes actually can handle higher payloads. So the Lectric XPedition is at 450 pounds, the Abound 440 pounds. And the Radwagon, which again I've said is a beefier frame and it just seems like a bigger frame, it's actually at 350 pounds. So that might be something to consider. If we've gotten questions on YouTube, say about this bike, like, hey, I weigh 300 pounds. Does that mean that I can carry 150 pounds on the rear rack? Yes. And the payloads are different as far as there's a max weight for the rear rack and then a max payload in total for the bike. Like, for example, with the Abound, the rear rack max payload, I think, is 145 pounds. In total, it's 440. So the rider could theoretically be around 300 pounds and you can carry 140 in the back and you'd be fine. Another point about just the design and the frames, and this is really important point for me, especially because I tend to ride with my children, are the kickstands. So all these have these double kickstands, so all three of these bikes. The Radwagon and the Abound have much more solid kickstands than the Lectric XPedition. I mentioned this a little bit in the video when I did the Lectric. It's just this thin kickstand that can easily, I mean, you can see this here, even though we're not on steady ground, we're not on cement, so it's not really that fair of an assessment, but I can tell you that the Lectric XPedition's kickstand is not as sturdy as the Radwagons and the Abound. Frame-wise, also, and this may or may not be important to you, I didn't think it was important to me until I had it. It's really nice to have a suspension. So the Abound is the only one of these three bikes that has a suspension. And in addition to that, you have this Doppler seat post, which acts like a suspension seat post. So out of all three of these bikes, because of the suspension, the Doppler seat post, I think this is the most comfortable one. So suspensions are not the norm with cargo e-bikes that are in the affordable price range, but the Abound actually comes with the front suspension and the Doppler seat post. All right, let's talk about accessories and extras. So when it comes to accessories, most e-bike companies, when they release a cargo bike, they tend to sell you all the accessories that you would want or need for a cargo e-bike. And all three of these companies have done that. So Lectric, Aventon, Rad Power Bikes, if you go to their website, you're going to purchase one of these bikes. They have packages, or they have all the accessories. Actually, during Black Friday, the Lectric package, or at least the basic package, is included with the purchase of the bike. So for $13.99 or $15.99, you get a few basic accessories. I would say that Aventon and Rad have done a better job of manufacturing and making accessories available for these cargo bikes. Like, for example, with the Aventon Abound, this front basket, this handrail, these were both sold, or these are both sold by Aventon. Same thing with the Radwagon, the caboose, the front basket. These are all ones that you can get. And I didn't see, they definitely have what they call the orbiter with Lectric, but they only have a few accessories. Whereas if you go to the Rad website or you go to the Aventon, they have a lot more accessories that you can add to these bikes. Also, a couple of these bikes, like the Lectric, and we don't have them on, but they have the footboards come with this bike. The same with Aventon. I took this off because I use a trailer, but it comes with footboards. The Radwagon does not. So those are a little bit, you have to pay for those extras. So keep that in mind when you're shopping, that the accessories also is something you should consider in terms of like the total cost of these e-bikes. And then I mentioned extras. Out of the three of these bikes, the one that comes with the most extras in my mind is the Abound, because you have things like the turn signals. So it's the only one that has turn signals. It comes with little extras like this bag, and I tend to put charger, I put tools in here in this bag. It also comes, like I mentioned, with the running boards or footboards. So this bike is the one that comes with the most extras. The Abound comes with a bunch of little extras, and it's providing a little bit more value for the price. And at $15.99, to add all these little things to it, like for example, again, the turn signals, or for example, you have a nicer Shimano shifter, or you have this bag that comes already integrated with the bike. So it's just kind of nice to have all these little extras, and it just provides a little bit more value. Now that I told you about all the differences, let me tell you about my experience riding these different bikes. So I'm going to touch on a few general topics. First one is going to be performance, which is a very general topic, but I will tell you, first, I want to break it up into power. So which one of these bikes as I was riding it, and when I say riding, I was riding with my two daughters, sometimes with the trailer, sometimes three kids. I took the Abound camping, where I had a Yeti full of adult beverages and food, and a trailer full of camping equipment. So we've tested these bikes. When it comes to the power, and we're talking about sometimes going not up steep hills, but definitely going over highway overpasses and slight hills. To me, the Lectric XPedition and the Abound definitely have more power than the Radwagon. So the Radwagon is the one that has the least amount of power. So it's no surprise that they don't mention how many newton meters of torque that bike has. Also, I question whether it's a true 750 watt motor, because these seem to have way more power. The Lectric does seem to have a little bit more power than the Abound. I think also part of what plays into that with between these two bikes as far as power is that the Abound has a torque sensor, so you tend to work more as you're pedaling uphill, say, versus a cadence sensor on the Lectric. So it's a little bit easier to go uphill on the Lectric XPedition versus Abound. So if you're going to be going up a lot of hills and it was between these two, I would say I would go with the XPedition. But in general, I thought that the Abound had more than enough power. Now, when it comes to top speed, the Lectric XPedition is the only one that gets close to 28 miles per hour. So the Abound and the Radwagon have a top speed of 20, while the XPedition, you can edit the settings and get up to 20 miles per hour. So if that's something that's important to you, this is a bike you want if you want a faster bike. In general, it didn't matter for me that the max speed was 20 miles per hour. I was fine with 20 miles per hour, especially because I tend to ride these bikes loaded with weight. So 20 miles was more than enough speed. I actually, for the most part, would be riding anywhere from 16 to 18 miles per hour. So now let's talk about the battery range. Now, again, if we were talking about just the XPedition with the single battery versus the Abound versus a Radwagon, the best range that I got, or that I've gotten out of these three bikes, has been from the Abound. And part of that is probably from the torque sensor, because they can be more efficient in terms of the battery use. I mean, I took this bike almost on a 50-mile ride on one full battery charge. I was using low pedal assist levels, wasn't using the throttle much, but it just seems like the better range out of these three bikes was from the Abound. And again, I think it's partly due to the torque sensor. All right, so now I've talked a ton about these different bikes. All right, so I just broke down these bikes according to a bunch of categories that I think are important to me, and I think that should be important to you if you're looking for a cargo e-bike. I think all three of these are good cargo e-bikes, depending on what your needs are. For me, and I will tell you right now, if you're wondering which one is my favorite out of the three, it's been the Abound. So I've ridden all three of these bikes extensively. The Abound and the Lectric XPedition are the ones that I rode for the most part this year. And I have to say that the Abound has been my favorite. Part of it's been the torque sensor, because I really like torque sensors, but I also feel like Aventon bikes are just bunned up a little bit more than rad bikes or electric bikes. So, and right now during Black Friday, this bike's $15.99. So now it's actually $200 cheaper than the Radwagon, and it's the same price, a little bit more expensive, so $200 more than the single battery version of the electric. But I think it's totally worth it because of all the extras that you get from the Abound. I've really enjoyed riding the Abound, and I think this is a bike, the cargo bike, that I'm going to keep for a while. So thank you very much for watching. If you're still watching with me, let me know if you have any questions or comments. If you have any of these bikes, or if you're trying to decide which one, let us know if you have any questions or comments. And thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a comment. Visit us at top5ebikes.com or some of our social media accounts. Thank you.